I'm Nikki Kett, and my client question was, how do you address nutrition in the taper phase of a swimmer's season in order to prepare for optimal performance during a collegiate championship meet? And also, how do you properly fuel and recover not only during the meet, during each session in preparation if you have multiple races, and also from session to session if you have a prelim, final, or a multiple day meet. Currently, I'm in my third year as the assistant coach at Johns Hopkins University. I'm currently pursuing my master's, and although I'm not a dietitian, these are some of the suggestions that I found from the research. Typically, a collegiate championship meet would be about 4 days long. Depending on the individual, one could swim multiple events per day, including a preliminary race in the morning and a final event at night. If that individual is a part of relays, they could be swimming 2 races in a session in the morning and 2 in the finals. Probably the max they would be doing would be about 3 per day if they were in 2 team relays and 1 individual. So it just depends. Some might just have 1 race per day, and some may have an off day. So typically the shortest event is a 50, which is considered a sprint event. It takes 25 seconds or less, usually at the NCAA level. Sprint events require the use of high energy phosphates from the muscles. Middle distance events usually last from 45 seconds to 15 minutes. That longest race would be your mile, and that's significantly longer than most of the other races. The second longest in collegiate swimming would be a 500, which takes about 5 minutes. So your middle distance events are going to use a combination of the phosphate system, anaerobic glycolysis, and aerobic combustion. Those are going to use carbs, fats, and proteins. Specific contributions of these energy sources will vary based on the distance and the intensity of the training. Proper diet is really important to try to maintain those glycogen stores, trying to make them a little bit bigger before the meet, and then trying to maintain them once we get into competition. So typically before a championship meet, swimmers do something called tapering, and during taper you decrease your workload but increase intensity. So you probably wouldn't be training quite as many hours as you do during the normal season. This leads to a benefit of 0.3 to 5% improvement in the performance. So it's really important. And it's based on what the individual needs and kind of how their coach works their training program. So there could be some slight differences there. Anyways, so there's a study that was done by Riley and Woodbridge in 1999. They studied the effects of reducing and increasing the percentage of carbohydrates in swimmers during their taper phase, or just during the normal season, to see how it affected their performance. So what they did in the first study, they took a normal carb load of 54% and they dropped it to 40% for 3 days, and then they performed a 400-yard time trial. The results of that study showed that they had a decrease in their performance after they depleted those glycogen stores by decreasing the carbs. On the flip side, they did the same thing, but they increased the carbohydrates to 59%, and what they saw there was that loading up the carbs for 3 days before the time trial caused an improved performance in both the 100 and 400 yard time trial. So from that study by Riley and Woodbridge, we can conclude that adapting some high carbohydrate foods a few days out from the meet to try to increase glycogen stores can really help load up the muscles in preparation. Something that is really important to consider during taper is energy balance. There was a study that was done by Usli Ponke et al. In 2001, and what they did was they followed collegiate swimmers, female swimmers, during their taper phase. And they wanted to see if, as their training volume decreased, if they made the same decreases in their intake. And what they found was that there were significant differences in expenditure. The expenditure was a lot less. However, the athletes weren't making a change in their intake levels. So because form, drag, and resistance can increase with slight changes in body composition, and especially after a 2 to 3 week taper phase, this is something that could really play a role in optimal performance. So it's really important for swimmers, especially female athletes, to make conscious decisions to limit their total intake to try to match their expenditures. Typically, females have lower levels of lean mass, which can cause greater energy imbalances. So we just want to make sure that we maintain our body composition during that taper phase. Stillingworth et al. In 2007 gave some specific recommendations. So for a 70 kilogram athlete, they recommend intaking from 2,800 to 4,300 kcals per day. For carbohydrates, for a higher carb diet, they recommended 7 to 10 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight per day. They recommended approximately 1 gram of fat and 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. Alright, so that's taper. Moving into the pre-meet and the warm-up. Shaw et al. In 2004 recommended eating a high carbohydrate meal 1 to 3 hours before the meet warm-up. This meal should be something that sits right and is easy for the athletes to ingest. They also recommended having 400 to 600 milliliters of a sports drink to help keep the athlete hydrated. When they get to the meet during warm-ups, carb drinks and light carb foods are going to help maintain muscle carbs and fluid balance, and will also help prevent hunger during the meet, so those would be important too. So immediately after a race, it's really essential that the athletes get in some carbohydrates, and this can be done in the form of a sports drink or a quick energy bar. Ivy et al. In 1989 showed that the highest rates of muscle glycogen resynthesis occurred 1 hour after exercise. When that was pushed to 2 hours, it reduced the rate of muscle glycogen storage. So that's really important. Make sure right after that race, even if you've got one coming up relatively shortly, just get a quick drink. Something that has carbs in it to keep those stores going. To promote longer term recovery, it's important that after the meet session to get a more full meal that's balanced with protein and fat as well. Mujica et al. In 2014 noted the importance of protein during a swim meet, as it's going to help to repair those tissues that were damaged during racing. Just a quick note, I know a lot of my athletes like to drink caffeine, but if you can, it's really important to try to limit that. Shaw et al. Notes that it may contribute to reduced quality of sleep, which could impede performance towards the end of a 4-day swim meet. So, to conclude, loading carbs before a championship meet is helpful, but the intake during taper should be balanced for the energy expenditure. Recovery immediately after races during the meet is really important. Really important to get those carbs in. After each session, a larger meal will help with this recovery. The research is limited on how preparation may differ for different events and different amounts of events. So I think that would be really interesting to study further. and also to consider the time of day of the meet, and how kind of chronobiology and nutrition go hand in hand. And that may implicate where we want to place our bigger meals for optimal performance. Thanks, and best of luck.